we've been spending time again with many of the leaders in the underground Iranian church. And this is why this particular group, in my opinion, is so important. It's so prophetic in that here you have a nation of former Muslims, all of them former Muslims who are now followers of Jesus, and specifically because of falling in love with the Jewish Messiah, the King of Israel, Jesus. They have this, and it's not just they sort of like Israel. They have this deep love specifically for Israel. Why? Because they've been reading the Bible, and they're looking at these passages, and they're seeing the Lord's plan. And so I want to send it back to you. Talk a bit just about why that is so contrary to the spirit of the age, how you can just see God's handprint all over it, the fact that you've got these Iranian believers that love Israel.
I mean, it's one of the most beautiful things in the world, because these aren't people who are, take the U.S. pro-Israel crowd. By and large, you hear people's stories, and, that's kind of the stock that they came from, you know? So often it's our parents, right, that share their love for Israel with us, or our pastor, or whatever. But imagine our church, your Jewish doctor, your Jewish neighbor, But in this situation, this is an entire nation that's been really brainwashed by a regime since 1979 that has been pumping ideology through the schools, through the mosques, through the media, through government, through legislation, to loathe the Jewish people and to call for and believe for, to pray for, to work toward their annihilation and genocide. So this is very different than just someone in the U.S., for example, which I think is beautiful when anyone discerns God's purposes with Israel and cherishes them. I think that's beautiful. I don't want to diminish it just because you were born in. That's a gift. That's amazing. But imagine not growing up in it. And that's what's so important about this, is because that's the majority of the earth today. So what's happening in Iran, I think, is so precious because it shows the potential for what the gospel can do in the nations. And this is powerful. I mean, the gospel is transforming the nation of Iran at such a deep level that not only are these people becoming believers in Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah, but they're also willing to lay down their lives for the provocation, for the blessing of the Jewish people. And I mean, that's just profound. And anyone who's been around the Middle East, particularly the Arab world at all, you know that the Christian community in the Middle East is not very pro-Israel. So you go to, identify pretty much any church, large or small, in the Arab world, 99 out of 100 of them are going to be anti-Israel leaning. So their theology is going to be very, very a different flavor of replacement theology than we have in the West. In the West, it's kind of more of a shallow, less personal. It's not driven by personal bitterness as much as it is in the Middle East. Because if you're in the Arab world, this is something that we wrestle with in the missions movement, is knowing, how to engage in these situations where you're engaging with a society that's so rabidly anti-Israel. And I'm so grateful for what the Lord is doing in Iran, because if it can happen in Iran, it can happen in Jordan and Egypt and Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. It can happen anywhere. And what we're seeing is that it is happening everywhere. And the Lord is moving on the Middle East and transforming the way. I mean, think about it this way. When you've got foreign ministers and ambassadors from Sunni nations going public, saying, hey, we should end this whole season of standing against the Jews and we should work with them, that's an indication of what God is doing on a much broader and a deeper level. Imagine what's happening behind the scenes, So yeah, what's happening in Iran right now is profound, and I think it's an indication of, it's kind of the equivalent of like licking your thumb and seeing which way the wind is blowing. Iran is telling us which way the winds are blowing right now. God is not just sweeping the Middle East with the gospel of Jesus. He's sweeping the Middle East with the gospel of the kingdom of the Jewish Messiah, who's returning to Jerusalem to fulfill all his promises with and through the Jewish people to bless all the nations. And the Iranians get that. One of their favorite passages, this is amazing, one of their favorite passages is in Jeremiah, where it talks about the throne of Messiah being established in Elam. Now, the book of Jeremiah begins, Jeremiah 3, with Jeremiah prophesying about the throne of David being established in Jerusalem. And it ends in Jeremiah 49 by saying, and the throne of David will be established in Elam. So there's two thrones in the book of Jeremiah, one in Jerusalem, one in Iran. You're going, wait, what happened in Iran that Messiah is going to set up an outpost there in the age to come? And I think the reason why is because Iran is going to play such a pivotal role in shifting the tide and changing the game in the whole Middle East, yea, even maybe even the nations through their witness and their testimony. It's powerful.
Yeah, for me, it's one of the most powerful things that in my whole Christian walk that I've been able to experience is because again, it's not something that you can manufacture. It's like you said, they didn't get this because of their denomination. They didn't get this from their parents. They got this by the Spirit of God, and it's real, and they own it. It's not something that has been imported from Christians in the West. They've just received this by the Holy Spirit because they're so isolated. Just this one story that I always share, and so I was sharing with the Iranian leaders, and I made some comment. I was teaching, and I said, okay, now from a biblical perspective, this is the gospel. I said, the American gospel often says this. And the translator looked at me and he said, I'm not going to translate that. And I said, why not? And he goes, Joel, the only thing they know is the gospel. They don't know the American God. Like they're not aware of all the controversies.
Don't pollute their minds.
Yeah. Like don't let that. They've read the Bible. They've read about the early church and they've experienced it. And so it's such a Holy Spirit birthed, cultivated, and led movement. And so it's so clear that the trends and the tides of the earth right now is trending toward anti-Semitism. And in the very nation that from a earthly, carnal, outward perspective, just in the news, they represent the greatest existential threat to Israel. That means they have the greatest potential threat to cause Israel to cease to exist right now. The current regime, that's the country that the Lord is raising up, one of the most pro-Israel, not just pro-Israel politically, but biblically, a movement of believers that are coming up out of that. So it's just, what Satan, we can look at Romans 8:28, God causes all things to work out for the good of those that love him. Yeah, we know that principle. But specifically, he uses the things that Satan does. He actually uses the things that Satan does for the good of those that love him and for the larger, completion of his own purposes.